the very least you were thinking about the Ten Commandments, which we read last week. If you turn for just a second, we're going to look at them because the authorship of the Ten Commandments is quite interesting. But if you look on page 442, which is the Ten Commandments. By the way, the Hebrew is not Ten Commandments. It's actually Aseret HaDibrot, which means the 10 utterances or pronouncements or declarations or sayings. 10 Commandments is actually a misnomer. It is not the right word in terms of translating it. And one of the reasons why is because there are not 10 commands in there. And the evidence of that is the first one, which says, I am the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, the house of bondage, which is more of a statement. And Maimonides actually argues that it is a command. It's a command of belief. Right. That you are commanded, obligated to believe this about God, that this particular God. And notice, by the way, what's the name of God in the Decalogue? Adonai, the Yud He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, the J, if you will. And so, one of the things that we do with this is that it's written differently from the way that it's chanted. And it's actually broken here. If you look, starting at verse 2, the 10 Commandments or the 10 pronouncements actually ends at verse 14, which may cause a mathematical conundrum for some of you, because you might wonder, how is it that the Decalogue takes 12 verses or 13 verses instead of 10 verses? And so, for those who are interested, if you turn to the back of your Chumash, to page 1509, they rewrote the Decalogue with what's called Ta'amei HaMikra Elyon, the upper accents. And this is how it's chanted. So you actually chant it as 10 distinct commands, or 10 distinct pronouncements. And so you can see that it's divided up differently here than it is there. And I only say this to you because we're going to look at its authorship. It was last week's Torah portion, so I always feel like we should connect it if we can to what we're reading. And
that was the Exodus.
Huh?
That was the Exodus portion.
Last week?
Last week was.
This past Shabbat? No, this past Shabbat, the Exodus was done.
No, but we read it as part of Exodus, the Yitro.
Yes, correct.
Recently.
Yes. Yeah, so this week's Parsha is Mishpatim, last week was Yitro.
And so that's where we read that.
Correct, exactly.
The second one is a little different.
The Deuteronomic one?
Yeah.
Yes, we're not going to get to that one yet. Okay. Anyway, so I just thought that, for those of you who are interested in how the text actually lines up in terms of... All right, we're going to go back to Exodus chapter 3, the burning bush. Did everyone have a chance to read the article?
Yes.
Okay, did it clarify things for you, or did it make it more confusing? It could be both. Okay. So where we last left off, Moses was meeting God for the first time. He's out wandering and he notices that something catches his attention, and in particular in verse 2, I'm on page 327 in the red Chumashim. And for those of you who are following along in the colorful book, page 121. He's kind of out in the wilderness, and he has his attention. His attention is somehow piqued in a different way because there's a messenger or an angel or something of Adonai who calls out to him and lures him in to see the burning bush, which is aflame but not consumed. And in chapter 3 in the colorful book, you'll notice that the literary piece that we've read goes back and forth between two different competing authors. It looks like J and E couldn't make up their mind, so they somehow wove them together into one long narrative. Why is that funny?
Sometimes it just seems so arbitrary.
Yes, it does. It does seem arbitrary.
Let's put this one together, but not those two.
By the way, if you never saw this book and you just looked at it in the Chumash, you probably would never even think twice about it. Right? So Friedman is offering a particular way of understanding the text. And he realizes that he's in the presence of God, although it's not clear that he knows what that means yet. And so he takes off his shoes and he kind of turns aside, and he realizes he's standing on holy ground. And verse 6, God officially says who God is. Stan, will you read, starting in verse 6, page, we're going to read in the red Chumashim for now. Page 328, verse 6.
I am, he said, the God your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their suffering.
Okay, let's pause there for a second. I want to look at the Hebrew for a moment. Look at verse 6. According to Friedman, he's going to make the claim that this is a source that was written by the author named E. What do we know about E? Elohim. How do you get Elohim from verse 6? Do you see the word Elohim anywhere?
Elohim.
You see Elohe. Now, where in Jewish tradition do we have the word Elohe? Elohe Yaakov, which is where, Julie?
It's in the Amidah.
It's in the Amidah. One of the interesting things about authorship is that later, as liturgy evolves, we don't differentiate so much between J's and E's. We weave them together into one narrative. And so what's probably happening here is that we're trying to use different ways of connecting to God, all as one part of our story. But in this case, the Elohe is connected to something. Usually you just have the word Elohim. But here, Elohe is connected to what? Say more.
So it's something, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob.
But it does it separately.
Say more.
Well, usually Elohim, Abraham, Isaac would come together, the three of them, but the fact that it's separated is interesting. It almost implies almost like three separate gods or interpretations.
Good. So there's this one, on one hand you could say, oh, is this one God or is this three gods? Right? Is it a different God for Abraham, one for Isaac, one from Jacob? Or is it the same God? I am the God that appeared to Abraham, and I appeared to Isaac, and I appeared to Jacob. But don't worry, I am still the same God.
They may have recognized me differently.
Ah, what does that mean? No, I like it. Say more.
I mean, every individual perceives God differently.
Okay.
So that's what this.
Good. And?
I have to remember the story now exactly as to how was. Not me.
Mine's off.
Tell God we'll call him that.
God's called.
But I think you're right. I think Rico is actually onto something. That one of the things we may be learning about the story is that each individual person or each key figure in the story will experience God in a different way.
Yes.
Now, Moses here is experiencing God in... Go ahead.
So Elohim, Elohai, could you explain Hebrew?
Sure.
I don't understand the Hebrew way. Is it a conjugation of a noun?
Okay, Elohim is the plural of what word?
God's.
Elohai.
El.
Oh.
Okay, El is the singular.
God's.
Okay? El is one God, Elohim is more than one God. We often use this word to connote one God.
So it's Elohai.
Elohai,
Oh, that's Elohai.
what is Elohe? If I say that I am Elohe Abraham, Elohe Yitzhak, Elohe Yaakov.
God's son.
The God of, it makes it possessive,
Possessive.
right? I am the God that belonged to, if you will. Or, I am Jacob's God, I am Abraham's God. By the way, we never pray and say, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Moshe, Elohei Aharon, Elohei David, Elohei, right? We don't say it that way. It really only stems to these three guys. Why?
They were the ones with the covenant.
That's exactly right.
They were the ones with the breed that went.
These are the guys with the Brit. And we're going to see this a little bit later when we get to chapter 6. Because in chapter 6 we have a new, it was almost like Moses and God went on J-date and they got to meet each other again. And God changed God's profile. And in doing so, God decided, right, well, status short, but God decided to use a different name. And so the question is, where is this name coming from? Now, Elohai, right? What is Elohai? It also means my God, right? But usually it's in the kind of feminine. Right? Elohai neshama, shenatatabi. Right? The God who's given me my soul. All right, but for our sake, it doesn't really matter so much. Elohei is just an extension of El.
Although it seems like he's being demoted.
How so?
Well, you know, so it's Yahweh speaking, but all you hear is Elohai or Elohim, and then it's, oh, the God of you. Oh, your God.
Well, it's interesting. Who is speaking here? Which God is speaking here?
Adonai.
Are you sure?
Yes.
How do you know?
7.
We haven't gotten to 7 yet. We're only on 6.
Okay. Point well taken.
All right. Oh, well, actually, let's play it out a little bit more. If you want to look closely, there's another name for God that's introduced in verse 6. Does anyone see what it is? Let's see if you can remember back to one of our scholars in residence from a couple of years ago. I'll give you a hint.
Yeah, Anohi.
That's it. Anohi. All right? In general, if I wanted to say I, what Hebrew word would I use? Ani. But in this case, it uses the word Anochi, which is a very personal expression of I. To prove the point, turn for a second to the Ten Commandments, to the Decalogue, and look on page 442, verse 2. The opening line of the Decalogue of the Ten Commandments is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. But what's the first Hebrew word that introduces Lord? Anochi. Now, it's possible, not conclusive, but it's possible that using this word is an introduction to God's name in a different way than what we've had before. And so what you might think is that we're not sure what the name of God is here, so God actually has to make a connection. Turn back for a second to the end of chapter 2. Look at verse 24 in chapter 2, page 326. At the very end of the story, after there's a new king that has arisen, that's even worse than the previous Pharaoh, God remembers the covenant, and in verse 24 it says, Vayishma Elohim et nakatam. God hears or heard their moaning, their suffering. Vayiskor Elohim et brito, and he remembers the brit, the covenant. What covenant? Et Abraham et Yitzhak et Yaakov. And so in a way, what's happening here at the end of chapter 2 and at the beginning of chapter 3 is a reconciling of those two traditions. On the one hand, God that we know from Genesis was in relationship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through this thing called a brit. What was the brit? What was the covenant that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob made with God? It was not that they were going to go have lunch every Friday at Katz's and have pastrami on rye.
Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply. What else?
As many people as the sands of the sea.
Yes, as numerous as the sands on the shores, and as numerous as the stars in the sky. And what else?
Also,
The land. The covenant was rooted in multiplicity and in diversity and growth, but also in the land. By the way, how does the story of the Exodus start out? What are the first things they tell us about the Israelites?
they were numerous.
They were numerous.
Like vermin.
Like vermin in a way, right? They were growing in a particular way. So in some way, there is a fulfillment of a piece of the covenant. Where do they go after they leave Egypt? To the land. It's about the fulfillment of the covenant. So the God that remembers or hears them while they're slaves is the God who is connected to covenant. If you were to hear the word breach, who might you think is the author of that text?
Priestly.
Priests. The priests. Why?
They're the ones involved with all the ritual, this kind of covenants.
Covenantal ceremonies connected to sacrifices
Right.
and things like that. And where did the priests live? Jerusalem. Why is Jerusalem connected to the Brit?
Because that's where Abraham was supposed to have taken Isaac.
That's right. That's where they say Mount Moriah is, right?
Sacrifice.
Sacrifices. That's where centrality of worship takes place.
But at this point, it's Shechem. It's not yet in Jerusalem.
No. Right. We haven't talked about the historical connection yet.
Okay.
We're just trying to unpack the basic piece of the story,
Got it.
and then we're going to bring it to the history. All right, so we end chapter 2 with a connect... Stan?
But isn't the covenant with Elohim, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Who is the covenant with? The story would seem to suggest in the end of chapter 2 that it's with Elohim. When we get to the beginning of chapter 3, verse 6 would seem to suggest it's with Elohim. But then you have in verse 7,
But seven, well, and that's
Adonai.
where he switches from E to J.
And it happens throughout the entire chapter.
Yeah.
It's back and forth. Barbara?
Unless you just see the whole thing as different aspects of the same God.
Good.
And so they're using different words, but it's not like a different God.
Right. And what we're going to get to, hopefully by the end of this class, is chapter 6. And chapter 6 is going to bring all of these things together in a different way.
Could this be a strategy of unifying two different populations of people, who one of whom called God Elohim, one of whom called God?
It's definitely a possibility. Absolutely.
And there's a subtlety here, which is, notice they called Jacob Jacob. It would have been problematic had they said the God of Israel.
Well, it's actually more challenging than that. If you go to the end of chapter 2, look at verse 23 and verse 25. They're called Bnei Yisrael here. So if they are Bnei Yisrael, then who are they the descendants of? Jacob. But not Jacob known as Jacob, Jacob known as Israel. How did Jacob get his new name? He wrestles with God, and God gives him a new name. But which God gives him the name? Elohim. Right? Because he gets the name Israel. Right? There's a reason. Wait, that was terrible.
But it's not a flattering name.
Well, it depends how you translate it.
Right, Prince of...
Jacob's new name has embedded in it the name of Elohim.
And the Isser is struggle?
Well, it actually comes from the word sar.
Sorry.
Sar can mean one of a couple of things. It can either mean prince or some kind of noble royal person. But in the text it talks about kisarita im Elohim, like that he wrestled with or he struggled with beings divine and human. And so it's a play on that word.
Why couldn't it be Yashar?
Could be. But there's one problem with it.
But do they put
It's a
the
sin.
dots? In Chumash, do they put the dots?
Do they put the dots?
The Shem and Sin, Sin and Shin, do they make it, do they make?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right. So that distinction is made, that dot is given.
I mean, look, we don't really know so much about it. But if it was, by the way, if it was Shin, then it would be Shar-El, which would mean the one who sings to God.
No, but Yashar.
You're talking about Yashar like Yashar Koach. Like means straight.
Or connected to, is not Yashar?
Yashar means usually straight or on the path. Like if you say Yashar Koach to someone, what does it mean? Congratulations, what's it mean?
Good talk.
Voter string, voter string.
Yeah, I love all the creative interpretations. Yashar means kind of like forward, right? Straight. If you ask an Israeli for directions, right? You say, how do I get to the restaurant? They'll say Yashar, Yashar, Yashar out of Sofa Yamina, right? They'll say straight, 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 straight till you get to the go to the right. Okay, so Yashar means straight. Koach means strength, right? So it means to keep pursuing or to keep going in strength.
And if you made it a sin instead of a shin, how would that change?
Well, if you made it a sin, then you have to come to synagogue on Yom Kippur to repent more.
You know, this whole thing about which name, it just says something about the author and the relationship of the people to the God. It
Yep.
doesn't say anything about the God. I mean, it's like
Sure.
if I were writing a story about a president and I called him President Obama and somebody else wrote things and called him Barack because they had a whole history, they
Yeah.
know him, they worked in the administration.
Yeah.
It's the same person,
Sure.
but it says something about our relationship
Absolutely.
and
And-
our view of that person.
Yeah.
So all of these different iterations of the name of God, to me, just reflects on the author.
That's
and-
right.
And what was going on at the time. It's
Absolutely.
the same God.
Let's make an argument for a moment that the person who wrote this was Moses. Okay, that Moses wrote the story. How would you interpret Moses' understanding of his relationship with God, with the back and forth between Adonai, Elohim, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov? What's going on for Moses?
Well, Moses has direct communication and he's commanded to do things by God and he's awed by God with the burning bush and he has a deep relationship with God.
Yep.
And probably reveres him and is a little afraid of him.
Okay.
But
Not
his
at this-
relationship-
Not at this point, he's confused. I mean, you could interpret
He
it
is
as he's
confused.
not,
Right now, he's
right now,
confused.
when he's meeting, he doesn't know what's going, I mean, but maybe what you said
Well, I thought
holds
No,
he
to,
wrote all this.
He wrote all
I'm
this
thinking
after
it's
the fact.
after.
but if you, okay.
Point in time.
But
yeah.
what I was saying is, but if you use what you're saying, sort of looking at it this moment, as he's looking back even, there's confusion.
Okay.
Sure. By the way, the confusion could be as simple as, wait a minute, your name is Adonai, your name is Ehiyah, but I know this guy named God who was the God of my ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Are you the same guy?
Yeah.
Right? Because
Okay.
I know Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they, passed down from generation to generation. They told me about this brit and this promise, but now you're using a different name. Tell me more about yourself. If you will, this is not just Moses' commissioning, being chosen as a prophet. This is Moses trying to figure out who is he vis-a-vis his relationship to God. By the way, you can make an argument that God doesn't do such a great job of listening in this story because Moses says more than once, it's not for me. Go find someone else for the job. He says, no, you're going to do it. Well, what am I supposed to say to them? This is what but that's not going to work, right? There's a lot of ambivalence from Moses. And it's probably not only because of the job, but he doesn't really clearly understand who the God is that's asking him to do it.
And what does he know from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? He was raised in the
Exactly.
royal house.
Was he?
We don't know.
He was raised. So what do we know about Moses that Moses might have a connection or an awareness of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob?
His mother was his wet nurse.
That's
We
right.
don't know how long it was until he was weaned.
Not only that, go back to the beginning of chapter 2.
He recognizes that there was his kinship with God.
Yes,
and
the
he was-
opening verses of chapter 2 say, a certain man of the house of Levi met a Levite woman. Who was Levi? One of the sons of Jacob. So it's an interesting thing why the Torah chooses to slip in certain pieces of information, but presumably, if it tells us this information, and he grows up in Pharaoh's house, but is cared for by his mother and sister, he knows who his roots are.
Told him his lineage.
That's right.
She's proud of him.
Not only did they tell him his lineage, but the Torah tells us his lineage.
How many generations have gone by between Jacob and Moses?
Jacob and Moses?
400.
Yeah, about 400 years. So whatever that is in generations.
So
And there was
Elohim
nothing in writing.
disappeared.
How did they remember who Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were?
That's a great question.
Because they had more than one person remembering, and that's why there's so many different authors.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that's really interesting is that they don't, it's not clear. This is a favorite question people like to ask. Why did it take God 400 years to all of a sudden and pay attention and listen to the cries and the moans of the Israelites?
I object to the question.
You object to the question?
It's not phrased.
Overruled. Oh.
Why did Elohim forget about the Jews for 400 years? And then why was it Yahweh that first heard us?
But you're making a certain assumption about the question that we hadn't gotten to yet,
Okay.
right? You're making it. You're
No,
making a different.
Peshat. Just it's Yahweh.
Forget Elohim, forget Adonai for a
Yeah.
second. I think it's a reasonable theological question to say, wait a second, now all of a sudden Moses, you want me to believe in this God? You've been absent for the last 400 years.
But it wasn't so bad all 400
All
years.
that's true.
The new Pharaoh came in, it got worse.
Except, we're not clear how, there were two pharaohs, several pharaohs that came in between, and at one point the first of the pharaohs that's described here doesn't remember Joseph. So we have to make some assumption that up until the time that Joseph dies and is forgotten, Israelites didn't have it so bad.
Yeah,
They
right.
did okay. What were you going to say?
There's something in, I think it's probably the 8th saying, which says that you know, obviously this commentary, that he didn't forget them. Or he didn't forget them, it's just that he was waiting for
That's right.
whatever this time was.
Yeah, and actually what it seems to suggest is that God needed the Israelites to cry out before God would act.
Well, he also needed a big enough group of them to go in and take over the land from those people that were living there.
Anyone who's ever had to deal with Jews knows that you don't want to deal with them when they get too big, because they're hard enough to contain as it is when they're small. But yes, probably. Yeah.
There's another comment about that things had to get so bad before he knew that they would be willing to
Yeah.
act.
That's right.
That's true. If you don't have any pain, you're not gonna go.
That's right. But, and that actually happens all the time in all kinds of things, you know? People who suffer from addiction, people who suffer from abuse, like, until it gets so bad that you're willing to cry out and seek help, oftentimes you can't get it. What were you saying?
This goes back to the fundamental thing that we have been talking about, names so many times.
Yep.
You know, I mean, this seems to be as if J always uses one type of name and E uses one type of name.
Yep.
But as an author, you know, we use multiple names all
Yep.
the time.
Sure.
So
By the way, there are a multitude of names for God. Remind me one time I'll bring you a list of all of the different names of God that appear in the Torah.
I object again. They're not really names. There's only one
Approach.
proper. There's only one. There's only one proper name of God, and
Which
that's
is?
Yahweh.
Yeah,
Every-
so
every-
that's what we're going to get to, is we're going to make an argument
Yeah.
that there is one name of God that will represent everything else, and that would be Adonai, Yud He Vav He, Yahweh, whatever you want to call it. But that's what we're going to ultimately get to in chapter 6.
I'm not pushing a theology. I'm just. The other words are called epithets.
Yeah.
Right? So an epithet is your highness, your royalty, but that's not a name.
So I just want to read the exchange that happens between Moses and God for a second. Stan, will you read starting at verse 7 and go through verse 15? I'm still in chapter 3, starting on page 328. Just listen to the back and forth that goes on between them.
And the Lord continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and I have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their suffering. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the region of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now the cry of the Israelites had reached me. Moreover, I have seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, therefore, I will send you to Pharaoh, and you shall free my people, the Israelites, from Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and free the Israelites from Egypt? And he said, I will be with you. That shall be your sign that it was I who sent you. And when you have freed the people from Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. Moses said to God, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, Aye, Asher, Aye. He continued, thus you shall say to the Israelites, Aye sent me to you. And God said further to Moses, thus you shall speak to the Israelites. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever. This my appellation for all eternity.
Right, so what's happening between Moses and God?
Negotiation.
Okay, a negotiation in some way. What else is happening?
Introduction.
An introduction. Great, an introduction. And how does the introduction play out? Who's having a hard time here?
Moses.
Why is Moses having a hard time?
We don't know.
No authority.
All right, that may be one issue. He actually has no standing in the community, at least not yet.
But he was the one who
He
grew
was
up in
raised in
Pharaoh's
Egypt,
house.
raised in Pharaoh's house.
So
He also was the
why
one
did-
who killed the Egyptian, so maybe he does have some standing. What else?
Talking to a bush.
He's talking to a bush. Right? He's in the middle of the wilderness. Could you imagine someone watching this from, what is he doing over there? Right? He's talking to a bush, and he doesn't have any clarity. What name does God want Moses to tell the people is the name of the God who sent him? Are you sure?
You just told me.
What's it?
The God of Abraham, Jacob, and
Well,
Isaac.
which one is it?
Well, all three.
They live in a polytheistic world where the Egyptians are worshiping all kinds of gods. He's going to go back and say, yeah, I share, yeah, sent me. Huh? Who? Oh, just tell him, yeah, was saying, sent me, right? Who? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay.
Yeah, they had one more.
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and...
But they
Steve
were
Perlman?
worshiping a multitude, they could add one more.
Well, it's confusing. He doesn't really know what's going on. And then God goes and gives him all of these instructions about what it is he's supposed to do, gather all of the people. And go to chapter 4 for a second, page 332. And after all of this stuff, after everything that is going to happen, after God says, I'm going to take them out from Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, yada, 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 Moses says at the beginning of chapter 4, what if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? But they say, the Lord did not appear to you. So then the Lord says, you know what? We're going to try it a different way. What's the new way?
What's in their hand?
Magic tricks. Why would magic tricks, by the way, which God are we talking about here is going to do magic?
Probably,
Take a look.
Yahweh.
Yahweh.
All right, it says in the Hebrew Adonai, but if you look at Friedman, who's the author? E. Boy, Jerry's going over here like, I don't get it. Why is it one here over there? Okay? He's right, because it's confusing. It's written in J. It's written in Adonai language, but it's written by an E author. That's weird.
That's not fair.
That's not fair, right? So let's try to figure this out. God does this whole thing with magic tricks. He says, put your hand inside your bosom, and out comes, you know, this scaly stuff or whatever. He does this whole thing with the staff, etc. And look at verse 5. He says that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, again with the Elohe, did appear to you. It's almost like Elohim, Adonai masked as Elohim. Now, why might you think that Elohim was the one who wrote this text, that E wrote this text? Why might you think that this is an E text? What's the content of it?
Magic.
Magic. Right? And what's he going to do? When Moses goes back to Egypt, who is he going to face off against? Not Pharaoh.
The magician.
Pharaoh's magicians. This is God, if you will, trying to prepare Moses to go head to head with his competition. But not necessarily to defeat them just yet. Just to say, anything you can do, I can do better. Anything you can do better, whatever. All right? And so he does all of these magical things. And by the way, this is not compelling to Moses either. Go ahead.
Well, it assumes that there are, implicitly that there are other gods, so that
Great.
Elohim.
Great. What you're starting to see here is that Moses is actually living in multiple worlds. And so God is trying to appeal to him in the world that he lives in. He knows that in Egypt there are multiple gods, and there are multiple magicians, there are multiple sorcerers, and they can all do different things. So he's trying to arm him to be able to compete. But of course it's not good enough for Moses. Look at verse 10, page 334. Moses comes up with another excuse. Please, O Lord, I've never been a man of words, either in times of past or now that you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and I am slow of tongue. Kaved peh uchved lashon. Literally heavy in the mouth and heavy in the tongue. So what does God say? Love this. Who gives man speech? Who makes him dumb or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go and do this. Not the most empathic response. And Moses goes back and forth, and eventually he's going to bring in Aaron to help him. But one of the things that we notice about this whole text is that it seems to be written with Adonai language, but E authorship.
But here's verse 14.
Yep.
Anger.
God's angry. Yes. Yes. God gets angry at Moses. Why?
Very early. I mean, just back and forth.
So why is God angry?
He's angry.
Too many excuses.
He has no
He's not accepting his job responsibilities. I told you how many times already. Will you just do it already? And so what he said, no, Aaron is going to help. Now, who was asking the question before about how did he know his lineage? Well, if Moses didn't know his lineage, God knows his lineage, and he says, your brother Aaron the Levite. So now we know his yichus. We know where he's from. And so eventually he's going to go and he's going to get ready and do all of these things, and he's going to go to Pharaoh. There's this very interesting thing that's worth noting. Look at verse 24 for a second. There's this very random story that's inserted into chapter 4. It's called the bridegroom's blood story. On the way back from this whole encounter out in the wilderness at the bush, he's on his way back to Egypt. And it says in verse 24, at a night encampment on the way, the Lord encountered him and sought to kill him. Adonai in particular. So Tzipporah took, who's Tzipporah?
His wife.
Moses, his wife, took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin. She did brit milah. She did a circumcision. Touched his legs with it, saying, you are truly a bridegroom of blood to me. And when he let him alone, she added, a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. So essentially, what happened? Moses forgot to circumcise his son. Now, God, you could have given Moses a pass. You were talking to him at the bush. He didn't have time. Why are you bothering him again? Give him a second chance. But he was going to kill him because he wasn't circumcised, so Tzipporah does it in her stead. This is actually the source for where we learn that women can be mohalot, right? That a woman can do a circumcision in the same way that a man can. If Tzipporah could do it, it should be good enough for anyone else.
Gershom or Eliezer?
This is Gershom. Presumably, I believe it's Gershom. And the second thing that we learn is that blood has a special power to ward off evil. What's the other classic example in the Exodus story? What specifically about Pesach? Right, you put the blood on the door, and what was the response? The angel would see the blood and it would be warded off. Right, it would pass over, if you will, so to speak. It was a way of protection. And by the way, this story is a J story. Why?
24.
But why would you want to have a J story in the middle of this? J can also be linked to covenant. Circumcision was one of the ways that Abraham entered into the covenant. It wasn't just enough to get a name change, he had to go have a procedure done as well.
But then you said earlier today, covenant is P.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, covenants were, but
and couldn't this be interpreted as a peace story? And I'll tell you why.
Please.
We pull Aaron out of the air and suddenly give him stature to speak for Moses.
Yep.
And if you can imagine these two contingents, the Levites, the other Levites, and the children of the descendants of Aaron,
Yep.
vying for authority. Ultimately, the descendants of Aaron come out on top.
Yep. Absolutely.
And And the ritual, at least as we know it ritually, Aaron becomes much more important than Moses.
Yeah. Yeah. Jerry?
What I understand here is that it sounds like that God's going to kill Moses because his son hasn't been circumcised.
Yeah.
Yet, we wound this whole big procedure with the bush that he's telling Moses exactly what he needs him to do
Yep.
to save his people. Why did all of a sudden, would he kill him over something so minor like this when he sent him on his way to do a major task?
So let's think about what the possible answer could be. It's a great question, a really great question.
Who was God intending to kill? Moses or Moses?
It's not clear.
It sounded it was Moses.
It's not clear.
I'm not sure.
Most people seem to suggest that it was his son.
That's what I thought it was.
Okay.
And
But if
so-
the Lord encountered him and sought to kill him, well, the him who's referred to, we haven't talked about the son of Moses. We've only been talking about Moses here.
Yeah, but
Who's him?
Moses actually is not here in the story.
Yeah.
It just seems to be Tzipporah and the son.
Well,
So-
in the last line
No,
is
it
about
says-
the 10th plague. He's gonna
It's a
kill
hint-
his
it's a
son,
hinting at it,
so-
yeah.
Yeah, but it says a night
It is
encampment
the
on
son.
the way, the way.
Yeah, but the
on
line
way
before
from
that
Egypt.
says now.
Correct. Tzipporah is on her way from Midian to go meet up with Moses in Egypt.
I thought they were all going together.
Except that he's not in the story. He's not in this particular story. It seems to suggest, if you go back and you look at chapter 4, there's an initial test with Moses. Where Moses goes back to his father-in-law, it's on verse 18. On 335. Moses went back to his father-in-law. By the way, it's another
A
name
weird
for
name.
Yitro here. It's Yeter, which is a truncated form of Yitro. He says, "Let me go back to my kinsmen in Egypt and see how they are faring." And Jethro said to Moses, "Go in peace. Go in peace." The Lord said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who sought to kill you are dead." What is he referring to? Pharaoh, right? There's a new Pharaoh, and anyone else who might have seen him kill the Egyptian are no longer in play. So Moses took his wife and his sons, he mounted them on an ass and went back to the land of Egypt, and Moses took the rod and God with him. And the Lord said to Moses, "When you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels," blah, blah, blah. And then it says, "I have said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me," yet he refers to let him go. "Now I will slay your firstborn son." That's the previous text. And then there's this aside. And Moses, it's not clear where Moses is in relationship to where Tzipporah is.
But if you read Friedman's text,
Oh.
it J ends with,
Firstborn.
and Moses took his wife and sons and rode them on an ass, and he went back to the land of Egypt, and continues, and on the way he was, so that interpretation of text places them together.
Yep. But the text itself, in the Hebrew,
Right.
doesn't suggest that Moses is there.
Yeah, but the use of the
But
word
the sentence
him,
before it perhaps does, so.
That's right.
the use of the word him, it means you have to, it has to be somebody who's already been in the story.
Correct.
Use the word him. His son has not been in the story yet.
But, well,
See,
that-
no, his son is in the story. They already named him as being born, but they don't
Yeah, but
talk about that.
we're talking about Lord sending Moses to Egypt.
Mhm.
The only individual at that point is Moses. So if you say him, it's got to refer back to the
Right.
last person who was in the
And,
story.
and the challenge is that verse 21 and 22 seem to suggest or to put up this thing that Moses may have been there. Right? God says to Moses, "When you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the marvels I put within your power. I, however, will stiffen his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, 'Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn son. I have said to you, let my son go, that he may worship me, yet you refuse to let him go. Now I will slay your firstborn son." That's referring to Pharaoh. And immediately thereafter is a story that is referring to Moses and his firstborn son. But where Moses is in the mix isn't clear from the text.
I think our analysis is shallow here too, because his children were born when he was with Yitro. Yitro was a follower of Yahweh, yet he didn't circumcise his children. So they're distinguishing that his
Between the
faith-
Midianites and the Israelites.
Right.
That's right.
And they're also distinguishing that Israelites won't have their firstborn son slain because they've entered the breed of the circumcision.
Can I ask you why you think that Yitro is a follower of Adonai?
It's from later in the story.
Well, the later story only says, now I know that Adonai is the true God, but before that,
It's not clear from this. There seems to be at least a reverence. A reverence.
The,
for it.
the Kenite hypothesis, that's a whole separate conversation. Yeah.
Okay, I want to look at chapter 6 for a moment because this is where it starts to get complex. And this is what the article was all about. So I'm looking at chapter 6, verse 2, page 351. I'm sorry?
I think what you said something about if it gets more complex,
Yeah,
how much more can it be?
it can. Because we're going to throw every possible name of God together in one verse and make it all really confusing.
Chapter 7, where's that?
Oh, no, I didn't say that.
No,
Okay, page 351, verse 2. I'm going to read this in the Hebrew. Vayedaber Elohim el Moshe. So Elohim speaks to Moses. Vayomer elav, ani Adonai. Okay? Elohim speaks to Moses and says, I am Adonai. Let me say it a different way. E speaks to Moses and says, I am J. Did everyone follow what I just did?
yeah.
Andy? Are you sure? Okay. I appreciate your honesty. Okay? But then it goes on. Va'era el Abraham el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov. And I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If I stopped right there and I were to ask you, what would the name of God be for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? What would you say?
Elohim.
You would say Elohim, which is a reasonable assumption. Give me 2 reasons why. Right, because we already know it says Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Yaakov. What's another reason? Think about Jacob's name. Jacob's name becomes Israel. Okay, so it's a reasonable assumption that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be Elohim. But no, he says something different. Va'era el Abraham el Yitzchak el Yaakov. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob be'el Shaddai.
Yeah.
With my name, El Shaddai. Ushmi Adonai lo nodati lahem. But my name of Adonai, they didn't know it. All right. If I said nothing else, Alvin, what's the smile for?
I just thought of a line in the song.
Go ahead.
They often call me something, but my real name is Mr. Earl.
I don't know.
You're too young.
Yeah.
Of course, right.
I know, Simon.
They also,
All right. So in this verse, in verse 3, we have a very interesting and perplexing piece of text where God seems to perhaps actually clear everything up for us. My name is Elohim, Moses, but I want to introduce you and tell you what my real name is. My real name is Adonai. And to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who you know, they knew me also. They knew me as El Shaddai. El for Elohim, and Shaddai, which means almighty, or the one that provides enough, or however you want to interpret it. And there are several places in the patriarchal stories where God does say, my name is El Shaddai, including one to Abraham. But they didn't know my real name. You, Moses, you get to know my real name. My real name is Adonai. Now, verse 4. V'gam hakimoti et priti itam. I established my covenant with them. By the way, look in the English translation for a second in verse 3, and look how they translated the name of God that was not known to the patriarchs. They didn't translate it, they wrote it in Hebrew. Look on the top line, Andy. Look on the top line of 352.
Oh, there.
Right underneath where it says Exodus 6:4 Ba'era. The first line in the English, it says, known to them by my name, Yud He Vav He. It doesn't translate it as Lord. And he says, V'gam hakimoti epriti itam. I also established my covenant with them. Latet lahem et eretz Canaan, to give them the land of Canaan. Et eretz mugurehem asher garu ba. To give him that as a place where they would live as sojourners. V'gam ani shamati et nakat b'nei Israel. I also heard the moaning of Israel. Asher mitzrayim ha'abedim otam v'ezkor et briti, because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I remembered my covenant. Lachen, and more leave b'nei Israel. Therefore, say to b'nei Israel, Ani Adonai, I am Adonai. Not any of the other stuff, I'm Adonai. This is where we get the fourfold verses of redemption. Hotzeti, I will take you out from Egypt. V'hitzalti, I will save you from the bondage. V'ga'alti, I will redeem you. V'lakachti, I will take you. Those four verbs correspond to four what at Passover? The four...
Oh, the four sons. Isn't it?
Yes, the 4 cups of wine in particular. And in verse 8 is the 5th verb, veheveti, I will bring you to the land, which is the 5th cup of wine, which is the cup of Elijah. 5 verses of redemption, 5 verbs of redemption, all corresponding to what Adonai is going to do in the ultimate act of redemption, which is take them out of Egypt and return them to Israel. But
by changing, by saying, by giving Moses God's name, it's elevating Moses then, in a sense, beyond the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I mean, that's
you got it. Moses just got a promotion. Yeah. Moses just became the most important figure in the Torah. And not only that, there are many people who believe that everything that happened in the book of Genesis was really all about getting to this moment when God revealed God's true identity to Moses. Moses was the greatest prophet according to the Torah, and according to the rabbis of our tradition. And why? Because what did Moses know with regard to God? Moses knew God face to face.
Face to face, God saw.
That's right.
Moses
sees God face to face.
Why are they reluctant not to translate Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh?
It's a great question.
But later they use Adonai. already.
That is correct. So why do you think?
Why in that one spot?
Go ahead, Phil.
It's God uttering his own name, so it can't be made into anything else. It's the holiest of all things.
And it's actually more than that. We don't know
How to pronounce it.
how to say this thing. We have no idea. They do. They translate it.
He says, say to the Israelite people, I am the Lord, and they translate it.
That's correct. And the reason why is because, how do we say this name, Barbara?
Yeah.
No,
No.
in Hebrew.
Oh,
If I'm reading it,
Adonai.
you would say Adonai,
It's not spelled out.
like this.
Which is a blasphemy.
Adonai. What does Adon
That's just
mean?
by convention, it's not spelled that way.
We actually don't know what this says at all. We just have called this word Adonai. What does Adon mean? Lord. It means master.
But if you took the 4 letters,
Yep.
you could pronounce that.
I have no idea how.
Well, what if it had nothing to do with...
Take a look, for example.
You just saw those Hebrew
Go back to-
letters.
go
You
back-
couldn't pronounce it?
Go look at verse 6 for a second. Look at the on where everyone see where it says verse 6? Look at the last word on that line. So on the second to last line, you see the Yud Hey Vav Hey?
Yeah.
It's written like this. If I were to read that to you, it would say Yehovah,
Okay.
right? Or YHWH, or written the right way, Yahweh. But we never say Baruch Atah Yahweh Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu. We don't-
No, but... Okay.
So the question you're asking is why here, of all the places, would they actually write it?
Where did the Yud come from?
Yud Yud? It's another form of the same thing.
No relation to anything.
It does. Because the Vavs and the Yuds are interchangeable in biblical Hebrew.
Okay.
And the hail are to be eliminated.
Yeah, that's true. So-
It's a
And
contraction.
the hay is silent.
What's
the-
the
Hail is silent.
The answer to the question is here. This is the only time in the Torah where God is actually naming God's self. Everything, actually, the appropriate way to read the text would never be to translate it as Lord. If I really wanted to translate this for you, I would say the following. Say therefore the Israelite people, I am Adonai. That's probably not even the right way to say it either. You might want to say, if you wanted to translate it, you'd say, I am Yahweh. But it wouldn't be to say, I am the Lord.
Well,
The Lord is just an English translation.
Why
It should be
do
Hashem, really.
people who put this book together?
Because they're trying to emphasize that in this
Why in
case,
verse 6 they didn't say Yud Hey Vav?
because in verse 3 is the only time in the Torah where God says officially what God's name is. So that,
It would,
but Ehiyah Asher Ehiyah doesn't say God's
So
name.
saying
Well,
my
he says
name
that's my
is,
name.
He says, my name is Ehiyah Asher
saying
Ehiyah,
my
call me
name
Ehiyah.
is different than saying
That's
I
right.
am
He's
the
saying that they knew me as El Shaddai, but my name, Ushmi, is Yud Hey Vav Hey.
Lord. Okay, and later when he says, say to the Israelite people, I am the Lord, that's not saying my name is.
no, the Lord is the English translation
Yeah, that's
of
right.
Hashem.
No. So Barbara's asking, I think, a different question. Why in only this one case?
Because it's the only case in which Yud Hey Vav Hey is spoken by Yud Hey Vav Hey. So it would violate one of the 10 Commandments.
I don't think
Because-
God can violate God's
No, no, if we were to mispronounce his pronouncement, it would be a blasphemy of his name. That's one of the reasons why the name withdrew. Is
Yeah.
by using the name you blaspheme.
I would say that
the
in thi-
distinction between saying my name is versus I am the Lord.
Correct.
The
In this
Lord's almost
case,
like his job.
right.
Yeah.
Usually,
That's it, yeah.
Adonai doesn't say, and my name is this, right? It's the narrator who's quoting Adonai,
Okay.
right? And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, right? Or God, whatever. So it's the narrator who's using that name. In this case, God's actually speaking in the first person and saying, my name is blank.
So,
And
so
But I think it's the only time that it happens. I mean, God will say things like, my name is El Shaddai, my name is Ehiyah Asher Ehiyah, but this is the only time that there's the use of the tetragrammaton being spoken and uttered by God.
So I don't understand why we make such a big deal about this, because to me, what we're really saying is this is a contraction for a concept of the essence of existence. I was, I am, I will be.
Yep.
That's the distinguishing trait of
Sure.
God. It's,
Well, it's this
and when he explains, when he says, yeah, it's a form of the word to be.
That's correct.
It's all about
But so
being.
is this.
Yeah,
This
it's
is
all about
it's
being.
all about being. That's right. It's a state of
So what's the
perpetual
big
being.
deal? I mean, that's who God is.
That's right. And I mean, I agree with you that there's not a reason to make such a big deal out of it. We actually don't even know how to say this.
You don't pronounce
Most people will, if you actually said, first of all, I wouldn't be allowed to write it on the board. Second, people would say Hashem. They wouldn't say Adonai or Yahweh or anything else. They wouldn't say anything. Okay, we're going to come back to this next time, and then we're going to have